Good evening. I'm Adrian Schenker, Executive Director of Bradbury-Sullivan LGBT Community Center, your local LGBT center right here in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us tonight to hear from Carter Sickels, author of The Prettiest Star, as part of our 2020 queer novel miniseries. During COVID-19, Bradbury-Sullivan LGBT Community Center is providing virtual programs, and this program is supported in part by the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, the federal state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Arts and culture programs at Bradbury-Sullivan LGBT Community Center are free for the community to enjoy all year long. However, we welcome your donations if you're able to keep making these programs possible for the entire community. You can donate right here on Facebook or on our website at bradburysullivancenter.org. For information about upcoming virtual events, and we have many, please visit bradburysullivancenter.org/events. Tonight, we are joined by Carter Sickels. Welcome, Carter. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Adrian. It's really great to be here, and I'm really excited to be a part of this series. So thank you so much for having me. So as Adrian said, I am the author of the novel The Prettiest Star, which just came out on the 19th, about a week ago today. So I'm going to read a little bit from this book for you all, and let me tell you a little bit about it first. So the novel is set in Appalachia in southeastern Ohio, and it's 1986. And this is 1 year after Rock Hudson died of AIDS. And that really brought the news of AIDS into homes across America. Although at this point already thousands of people had died and were HIV positive. And Reagan didn't publicly address the nation until 1987, after 40,000 people had died. So there are three main characters in my novel, and Brian Jackson is the main character, and he's 24 years old. And he's been living in New York City since he was 18. And once he finds out he's HIV positive and he's lost his boyfriend and friends to AIDS, he decides to go back to his hometown. And he takes his video recorder back. He's a video artist, and he will document his kind of last summer with his family. Also have his little sister, Jess, who's 14 years old and hasn't seen her brother since she was 14, and their mother, Sharon. So the novel moves from those characters' points of views. And I'm going to read from each of them. And I'm going to start with Jess. So Jess, again, is 14 years old, and she hasn't seen her brother since she was 8. She doesn't know why he left or really why he's come back. I mean, that's a big part of what this novel is about, is the secrecy that Brian's parents sort of allow him to come back to the family home, but they don't want him to tell anyone that he is HIV positive, or for anyone to know that he's gay. So there's all this sort of secrecy, and that's weighing on all the characters, and it's certainly weighing on Jess. And one of Jess's interests is whales. She reads about them all the time. She watches these nature specials on TV, and whales kind of help transport Jess from Ohio, from the small Ohio town, to kind of the wilderness and mystery of the sea. So this is just the opening of Jess's first chapter. So Brian actually hasn't arrived yet, but this is a scene where her mother is telling her that Brian is coming back. So I'll just read the beginning of this scene. The killer whales are the most misunderstood of the whales. To begin with, although everyone calls them whales, they're actually dolphins. For hundreds of years, people believed killer whales were man-eaters. It's not true. They don't attack humans. Killer whales travel in pods and hunt and play and rest together. In the wild, the females can live up to 100 years. A mother's offspring stays with her for life. They mourn their dead. My mother fakes interest. Something is wrong. She hardly ever comes downstairs except to do laundry, and she's not much of a TV watcher. Would you look at that? She says, eyes on the screen. How can that be real? The show has moved on to blue whales, the biggest mammal on Earth. One parts the ocean like a giant submarine. A close-up shows its enormous battle-scarred body, all the nicks and healed-over cuts and scrapes, cement-colored barnacles clinging to it like clusters of dead flowers. Bigger than any of the dinosaurs, the man says in his calm voice. Its heart is the size of a Volkswagen Bug. Facts I already know. When I was little, I pored over the pictures in the sea, part of a collection of books from the Life Nature Library that my grandmother gave me and my brother one Christmas. We also had Early Man, the mammals, the universe. I saw my first episode of The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau when I was 4 or 5, and after that, I was hooked. I want to be a marine biologist, but I live in Ohio. I've never even been to the ocean. I reach into the box of Cheez-Its. You're going to ruin your supper, my mother says. My mother doesn't eat junk food, and she's always on a diet, even though she isn't fat, not like my aunts. I'm not either, but I'm plump. That was what one of my Sunday school teachers said about me. Plump is a horrible word, like chunky. My mother is pretty. Everyone thinks so. She looks like a movie star in one of those old black and white movies that run on Saturday afternoons when nothing else is on except baseball or kung fu. Jess, honey, there's something I need to tell you. This is what she sounded like the day she told me about sex. When a man and woman love each other, when they're married, she'd started, using the same teacher voice she's using now, and I wanted to die, hearing my mother say the word penis. What? I ask. The orange crackers are the size of postage stamps, and I drop them one at a time in my mouth, splintering and crushing them with my teeth. The corners of her lips lift, but they are pressed too tightly to turn into a smile. She's still wearing her work clothes, iron tan slacks, a navy blouse with scooped neck, and her makeup is soft around the eyes. Unlike my grandmother, my mother believes makeup shouldn't call attention to itself, but only be used to enhance natural beauty. When I turned 14, she told me I was allowed to wear blush and lip gloss, but I hardly ever put it on. I don't look right in it, not like the girls at school. It's about your brother, she says. Brian? I ask stupidly, as if I have more than one. He's coming home. My mother's eyes, a light brown, like watered down Pepsi, the same color as mine, glisten, but no tears fall. She tells me she'll be here this weekend. To visit, I ask. To stay? A little sigh escapes, her shoulders sink. We don't know yet. I have a million questions, and she says we'll talk more during supper after my father gets home. She needs to check on the meatloaf, she says. She kisses me on the forehead, and the fruity, soapy scent of Charlie, her work perfume, lingers after she's gone. The invisible man on TV, in his trusting, all-knowing voice, explains they still don't know where the blue whales go to breed, somewhere deep in the ocean that scientists can't pinpoint. As a marine biologist, I will work for National Geographic or NOVA. I'll go out on a boat in the middle of the ocean, no sign of land for miles. Blue, more blue. Brian and I used to watch Jacques Cousteau together. One time he brought home the record, Songs of the Humpback Whale, and we listened to it stretched out on our backs across the carpet, pretending we were floating in the sea. I dust off my hands. My mouth tastes salty and dry. A sperm whale lifts its gigantic wrinkled head out of the dark water, and then the screen goes to static. The tape ran out before the show ended. I curl my knees up to my chest, wrap my arms around them. Suddenly I feel very small. I haven't seen my brother since I was 8 years old. Sometimes Brian would let me come in his room and we'd listen to records and play Go Fish, candles dripping wax, David Bowie singing about moon age daydreams and outer space and a starman, thick flowery scent of incense. Brian blew cigarette smoke out the cracked windows, talked about California, New York, dream states, he said, where people went to be free. So I'll stop with Jess there, and then I'm going to read two other just short sections for you. So I also write from Sharon's perspective, and that's their mother. And when I wrote a chapter from her perspective, it was a few months into starting a novel, and there was just so much sort of potential with her and room for tension and complexity. But also writing from her point of view gave me another angle into the story, but was also a sort of complicated and troubling one because her worldview is very different from mine. And, Sharon wants to sort of hold her family together, and she presents herself as someone who's got her house in order, but she's kind of on the verge of coming apart, and she's dealing with this grief with her son. She loves her son very much, but she's also worried about what her neighbors are going to think and what the church will say. And she has really she has trouble kind of questioning her ideology, ideology she's been taught, and even recognizing her own kind of homophobia. So one of the novel's question asks, how will Sharon examine her own beliefs and what she's been taught, and will she evolve over the course of the novel? So this is just a very short scene after Brian has been home a few weeks. And her husband is Travis. And Travis, he doesn't want to tell anyone about Brian. And he just sort of retreats from the family. He can't accept his son or love him unconditionally. And so this is just a short scene between the two of them. I'm not outside for more than a few minutes when I hear the door. Afraid it's Jess, I stub out the cigarette. I don't want her to know I've started smoking. But it's Travis, still in his work clothes, smelling of cheap beer and sweat. He squints, sounds hurt. You're smoking? Since when? I don't remember, a month or two ago. I relight the cigarette, and Travis lifts his eyebrows and makes a sound, surprised. He doesn't look good. Heavy eyes, the skin around them pinched, gray black stubble, thick mustache. He needs to shave. I don't know what I'm sorry for exactly, but I am. We haven't made love since Brian's been home. I made you a plate, I say. You want me to heat it up in the microwave? No, I had a burger at the refuge. I can't force them to spend time together. I've mentioned to Travis that maybe they should go to a ball game, but he just says, we'll see. I've seen how Brian looks at him, the longing in his eyes. The sun flattens into a thin red line. Next door, the Pentecostal girls' prairie dresses hang limply from the clothesline, like drabber versions of themselves. Travis comes closer, doesn't touch me. The evening light spreads cloud-like across the yard, turning trees into tall, still shadows. I feel his body tense next to mine, the hushed silence, the weight of what he wants to say. Today at work, Wayne asked me what was wrong with Brian. Travis pauses, wants to know what is really wrong with him. He can't stand the thought of disappointing his big brother, can't stand the thought of embarrassing or disgracing the family. Did you tell him? I ask. Are you kidding? Do you know what he'd do, what he'd say? I remember very long ago, Wayne said that people with AIDS should be sent to a far away island. And every one of us, me, my husband, my nephews and nieces, we all agreed wholeheartedly. Protect the good from the bad, the normal from the abnormal, the innocent from the infected. They know something is going on, Travis. Maybe we should tell them. He has not said the word yet. Maybe he never will. And I'll continue to go along with the charade, because what else can I do? My son is sick. My son is dying. No, no, no. If we don't say these words, they will not be true. But I can't keep hiding, not like this. No, Travis says with finality. We can't tell them. Nobody can know. And then I'll read one last section. And I'm going to read from Brian's point of view. And Brian is, this is his story. And I wanted him to anchor the novel. You know, he's lost his friends, his boyfriend to AIDS. He feels isolated and abandoned. When he was younger, he's kind of this jock. He was this baseball star and very popular, but he also felt very alone and apart from the others. And when he was younger, the music of David Bowie sort of spoke to him. and was this expression of sexuality and gender that he'd never seen before, and kind of represents freedom for Brian. So he left for New York at 18 years old and found community and friendship and love. And as I mentioned before, he was an artist, and he brings home his video camera, which were becoming very popular in the mid-'80s. And so his sections are set up as these recordings where he uses the camera as a kind of diary and records himself. And so I thought that was a way for him to really control his own story and to document his life and queer life and to have a record of it. So he's been home about a couple months at this point, the scene I'll read from. And this is a scene with his grandmother. And I should say his grandmother is the one family member who never has expressed any shame or embarrassment about Brian. And she's really the one who stands by him and kind of protects him. So this is just one short section. June 27th, 1986. Today, I was watching TV with my grandmother, and Tammy Faye Baker was on, singing about Jesus, and Mama looked at me. Honey, even if you don't go to church, God will listen to your prayers, she says. Good Lord, was she telling me to get right with God? Does she worry I'm headed to hell? Tammy Faye doesn't seem to believe in a punishing kind of God, and I don't think my grandmother does either. As Tammy Faye blinked her mascara thick lashes, I was reminded of drag queens I knew in New York. I wouldn't mind going to church with Tammy Faye, I said, especially if she'd let me do her makeup. Mama giggled. Big alligator tears started to run down Tammy Faye's glittery pink cheeks. Oh, there she goes. Anything can set her off, Mama said. When I was little, on Avon nights, we'd sit at the table, and Mama would make lists of what she'd sold and what she needed to reorder. I'd help organize everything, lining up mascara wands, tubes of lipstick, flat-pressed squares of eyeshadow, moisturizer that smelled like flowers, eye cream. I loved the dark green bottles of perfume, the elegant gold cases of rouge. My grandmother didn't care if my hands fluttered. She asked my opinions and trusted my taste. I think Mama would have loved to see a drag queen. Sometimes I'd help friends with their makeup, but I only did drag a couple of times myself. I never performed or went out in public, didn't have the nerve or the courage. But still, when I sat in front of a mirror and brushed on blush and eyeshadow, glued on eyelashes, I felt a wild shock of delight. Boys came to me because they had the right touch. A few of them are dead, others sick, others infected. They were thrilled to be wearing makeup and sparkling gowns and wigs, and to be free from their father's disappointment and shame. They were so beautiful. And so the novel follows these three characters and focuses on their stories. And so I will stop the reading there.
Thanks so much, Carter. That was a really wonderful reading of an exciting brand new book. And congratulations on this book. Just a couple
Thank
questions
you.
to start. And as a reminder for community members watching on Facebook, to also feel free to type questions into the chat. But The Prettiest Star includes discussions of familial challenges and stigma at a critical time in the early days of HIV. Here we are living through another health pandemic that coincides with your book release, but I know that you wrote the book before this. I'm wondering, how your thoughts on stigma, relate to how you wrote the book and lessons that might apply today.
Oh, thank you. And that's a great question. Yeah, of course, I wrote the book long before COVID-19. And I wrote it to shine a light on that period of the 80s and 90s of the AIDS crisis, when so many people were stigmatized and turned away from family, turned away from church. The government wasn't responding. They were really seen as expendable, and people were dying and much of America did not care. So I wanted to shine a light on that. But I think, it still resonates in this way of dealing with the stigma and the shame that a lot of people feel from their families or from the government, whether that is about HIV or about being queer. As you said, the book does deal with familial homophobia, and that was a major um, subject and topic that I wanted to tackle in writing this. I think that the book resonates in ways now that it is about this very specific time period. And with COVID-19, I think it's maybe like resonating in other ways. And one of the questions that the book kind of examines is what kind of society do we want to be? And how are we going to take care of each other and show compassion and love for each other? And so I think in that way it resonates. Um, Also, I'm finding a lot of, I don't know, inspiration from AIDS activists from the 80s and 90s and from ACT UP about resilience and about resistance to kind of what's going on and how our government is responding now to COVID-19. I think they're very different illnesses, so we don't want to draw easy parallels between them because the stigma that people had to carry in the 80s and 90s is very different. But I think that we can certainly draw on that time period to help us kind of get through this.
And also to just take lessons learned from activists in the past and hopefully not let our government make the same mistakes again.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm wondering what some of your hopes are for this book. It's a brand new book, just out now. So what are your hopes in terms of how this book is released into the wild, and what that means for your readers and for the issues that are raised in the book?
Yeah, I mean, it looks a little different than what I was expecting. I thought I would be touring at this point, so I'm doing a lot of virtual interviews and readings, but it's been fantastic just to connect with readers from all over. So my hope is that it reaches a wide variety and population of readers. I think it's a book that will speak to people who survived and lived through the AIDS crisis. I think it speaks to younger readers as well. I teach in Kentucky, and I have a lot of students who um, did not know anything about the AIDS epidemic. It was a part of history or part of America that was completely silenced or from them, that they were kind of kept in the dark about. And they feel sort of fired up and angry about that because their teachers didn't want to talk about AIDS, and they didn't want to talk about gay men. They didn't want to talk about homosexuality. So they just didn't learn this part of what I think is such a critical part of not just queer history or queer identity, but American history and identity. And so I think that it also will speak to like these younger readers who want to know. I mean, I think as LGBTQ people, like we want to know where we came from, and to help us kind of who we can be and who we are now, and again to kind of gather that strength from men and women and other queer people from that time period.
I really appreciate that this book takes a look at queerness from a rural landscape as well. And when you mentioned that you are from Kentucky, I thought that was a really important thing to highlight. The Lehigh Valley, where Bradbury-Sullivan Center is based, we serve small cities, but also rural communities. Can you just talk a little bit about how you think that like rural queer communities and also the families that we live with or are from, how that was important in the way that you chose to put this book together?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Ohio and now I live in Kentucky, but I've lived in New York City and in Portland, Oregon, and I love that urban kind of experience. But I do think there's it's kind of an overlooked story that there's this intersection between queer and rural. Queer queer people in rural spaces that we don't often see in literature or in really in any media. Um, and I don't know, I think it's an important sort of discussion to have. I think that people in rural places, queer people who live there, are really hungry for that representation. I know, as someone who grew up in a small town, like I never saw queer people in rural spaces on TV or in books, and I was sort of starving for that. And I also think I think that it can be sort of simplified in that, you know, urban equals progressive equals, you know, queer, like all of those are together, and then, you know, that there are no queer people living in rural areas. So I kind of want to, I guess, interrogate that and examine that and show kind of what that looks like. You know, my character Brian, he goes back because he doesn't have a lot of choices, but I think it's also interesting and important to think about people who want to live in rural spaces who are queer and what that looks like.
Thanks. And last question is, if you can share, you know, who are some of the queer writers who inspire or energize you as a writer?
There's so many. I mean, there's just such a wealth of queer authors and writers, you know, especially right now. I mean, I always go back to like James Baldwin. It's one of my heroes. Dorothy Allison, I think, is really important because she's looking at that kind of queer rural intersection and writing about difficult and hard um, uh, issues. But so many, Andrea Lawler, Carmen Maria Machado, Garth Greenwell, Ocean Wong, Maggie Nelson, Emma Copley Eisenberg, who I know is from Pennsylvania. There's so many writers right now who are writing fiction, writing memoir about queer lives and queer experiences. And they're, I think, really doing some exciting work, inspiring work.
Well, would you please hold the book up for everyone just one more time
Of
so that you
course.
can see the cover?
This is the cover, which I'm very
And
happy about.
it's an awesome cover. We want to let
Thank
folks
you.
know who are watching that we have a link in the chat where you can order The Prettiest Star from bookshop.org, where a percentage goes both to support local bookstores and also a percentage is donated back to Bradbury-Sullivan LGBT Community Center to support other arts and culture programs. So that's a great way to buy this book, but also The Prettiest Star is available through any bookseller, including our local independent bookstore in the Lehigh Valley, Let's Play Books. So order it from the place where you feel most comfortable buying books from. And we want to first thank Carter. Thank you once again for joining us tonight for our queer novel mini-series. And just to remind our community, the arts and culture programs at Bradbury-Sullivan Center are always free, but we do welcome your donations if you're in a position to donate. And those can be made either on Facebook or on our website at bradburysullivancenter.org. We have many virtual events to keep our community connected throughout the year and throughout this very challenging time when we can't produce programs in person. We still are producing programs virtually, and we hope that you'll join us for many others, including the rest of the Queer Novel mini-series. And finally, we just want to thank Pennsylvania Humanities Council one more time because it was through their pop-up grants for cultural producers that was started to support virtual programs during COVID-19 that we're able to offer this wonderful Queer Novel mini-series. So thank you to Pennsylvania Humanities Council for their support and to all of you for watching. So thank you. Have a great evening.